Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Sanhedrin daf Samach Zayin. Today is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with the meisit. Okay, new Mishna. We're now talking about a meisit, someone who sways other people to go worship idols. Ha-meisit ze hidyot. So the din of meisit is stoning. And what we're talking about is a regular person. Now, the problem is, Rashi is going to say here, this means that if it's a Navi, for example, okay, then let's say it's a prophet, that and tells people you're supposed to worship idols, that you don't get skila for, you get chenek. Okay, that we're going to see later. And ha-meisit et ha-hidyot. We're talking about someone who sways a regular person, not someone who sways a whole city, like a meidiach. Okay, because the meidiach, Rashi also says, is going to get chenek. Okay, someone who gets a whole city to go worship idols gets strangulation. This is going to be a bit of a problem. The Gemara is going to deal with this issue because this isn't really the case, but we will get back to that. Amal, so now we're going to see what would a person who's a meisit say. Yesh yirah b'makom ploni. Okay, there's an idol in a certain place. It's called yirah, is like the name of an idol, or it means like someone you should fear, like an idol. Kach uchelet kach shota. This is what she eats. This is what she drinks. Kach mitiva. This is what she does, like does good to the people who worship her. And kach mirian. This is what she does bad to people who don't. Now, any other death penalty in the Torah, we learned this already, that we're going to be much more strict with the meisit because the Torah says don't have any pity on people like this. But everyone else, remember in the beginning of the Masechet, we said you have to try to find this chut, you have to try to exonerate them if you can, acquit them. But now they say, another difference between the meisit and everyone else, we don't do any sort of setup. Okay, like a drug bust, and sometimes they put in a person pretending I want to buy drugs, and it's all a setup. We don't do that with anything in the Torah, only this. Okay, now they're going to say, here's an example. Okay, first we're just going to give a regular meisit case, and then we're going to say what would be a case where you would have to do this hiding witnesses. Okay, that's what hachmana, machminim is, we hide witnesses and plant them to be able to catch the guy up. So Amar l'shnayim, let's say the person goes over to two people and says, let's go worship idols, right? And tries to convince them, like, and says whatever, they say. As we saw earlier in the Mishnah, perhaps that's some other thing. Let's go worship idols. We'll see also at the end of the Mishnah all sorts of languages one could use to be meisit. Hey, Nadav. Okay, they become his witnesses. They were the ones he tried to sway. They come to the court and say, listen, this guy tried to do this to us. They bring him to court, and they stone him. Amar le'echad, what if he only does it to one person, then we don't have two witnesses? So this is where we need to do the hachmanat edin, the hiding witnesses. He says, listen, I have some friends who also want to do this. If the guy was smart, the meisit, and he doesn't want to speak in front of them, right? And he says, no, I'm good. I'll just want to do it with you, because he knows that once his witnesses, they could bring him to court, and he doesn't want to get involved in that. They have witnesses on the other side of the fence. And then the person goes back to the meisit. He already tried to sway him. So what does he do? Well, he says, and more Tell me again what you said to me before. Okay. And the person says, this is what I told you. I said, this is the idol. This is what she eats. This is what she drinks. This is what we should do. Now, even though we're not supposed to have rachmanut on this person, we do want to try to bring them back to the way of God. So we say, but I don't understand. Like, how are we leaving our God and going to worship trees and stones? If it succeeds, that's the best. Then this person stops being a meisit. Okay. But if he says, no, this is our obligation, we have to worship idols, this is good for us. So now the two witnesses that were hiding, they now can bring him to court, testify against him, and get him stoned. Now we're going to have all the different languages, and with that we'll finish the Mishnah. Evod, I will worship. Now remember, we had avodah, right? We worship idols. We have zvicha, we slaughter animals. We do haktara, right? All these are forbidden things. The incense, and asech, pouring libations, and bowing. So now we're going to have all the different languages of saying any of those things. Evod, I will worship. Elech ve'avod, I will go and I will worship. Nelech ve'navo, we should go and worship. Ezbach, I will go. Remember, this guy's saying, I'm going, why don't you come with me, really is what he's saying. Elech ve'ezbach, I will go and I will slaughter. Nelech ve'nizbach, we should go do it, right? We'll do it together. Aktir, I will offer incense. Elech ve'aktir, I will go and I will offer incense. Nelech ve'naktir, we should go and offer incense. Enasech, I will pour libations. Elech v'enasech, I will go and pour libations. Nelech v'nasech, we should go and do it. Eshtachaveh, I will bow. Elech v'eshtachaveh, I will go and I will bow. Nelech v'eshtachaveh, we will go and we will bow. All those are languages that are going to be obligated for being meisit. Now the Gemara says, the first thing the Gemara does is what Rashi did before, which is hameisit ze hedyot. Tam, okay, they just quote the Mishnah, that's a hedyot. Tam the hedyot. Hanavi bechenek, if it were a navi, it would be chenek. V'hameisit et hedyot. Tam the yachid. Harabim bechenek, right? So now someone who's meisit a hedyot gets stoning, but if it's many people, it wouldn't be stoning. Maniti mani, but wait, if we say this, who does the Mishnah go according to? Rabbi Shimon. It's only Rabbi Shimon, Ditanya. Navi shidiach b'skila, Rabbi Shimon omer bechenek. Well, a navi who's meidiach, who gets people to worship idols, gets stoned. Rabbi Shimon says chenek, strangulation. And then if we say this Mishnah is stoning only for an individual who does it, not for a navi, it goes against the rabbis. But it fits with Rabbi Shimon. Meidiach iranidacha b'skila, Rabbi Shimon omer bechenek. Those who get a whole city to worship idols get stoned. Rabbi Shimon says chenek, and again, Mishnah only matches Rabbi Shimon. That would be all fine and well, except that we didn't get to the next Mishnah yet. The Gemara now quotes the next Mishnah, which we're going to see in a few minutes inside. Ema seifa, but look at the end of the Mishnah, meaning the next Mishnah. Meidiach is someone who says, let's go worship idols. Now, it didn't say here meidiach is Rabim, gets a whole city, but first of all, it comes from the language of ir hanidachat lahadiach, and which is a city that all worships idols, and Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. On that Mishnah, it's going to be the first line of the Gemara on that Mishnah, meidiach iranidachat shanu. They're talking there about iranidachat, and it's listed getting stoned. So, Atan the Rabbanan, that clearly the next Mishnah matches the rabbi's position. So, Reisha Rabbi Shimon, Sefer Rabbanan, does it make any sense that the Mishnah will flip from Rabbi Shimon to the rabbis? So, we're going to have two answers to this. Ravina Amar Kula Rabbanani. The whole thing is the rabbis. And also the Nevi Sheker, and also the meidiach, a whole city, gets stoned. Below zo av zo katani, and it's starting with the basic case of the meisit, where there it was clear in the Torah you get stoned. And then from there they learn not only that, even a navi who does it, and even a meidiach who does it. You know, someone who is meidiach a whole city. Rav Papa Amal, okay, the truth is it doesn't really mention the navi anywhere, but the meidiach is in the next Mishnah, but if we go according to the rabbis, you'd have to say the navi also would get stoned. Rav Papa gives a different answer. Kikatani meisit ze hedyot lahachmana. They really did mean meisit is only someone who's meisit a hedyot, okay, or only a meisit who is a hedyot, okay, both those things. But they weren't saying only this person gets stoned and the other people don't get stoned, they get strangulation like Rabbi Shimon. No, what it meant is that's the only case where we do this hachmana, this planting and setup. We only do that in that case. And Tanya, now they're going to bring a braita that talks about hachmana. This braita doesn't really add very much, but it does, okay, you know, if we read it, okay, I'll read it and then I'll tell you you'll have to wait to get to the cliffhanger at the end of this. But right now we're going to read the braita and you're going to see the braita doesn't add very much except for one little point. You have to wonder why this braita is added, but perhaps I'll give you a good reason as to why the braita is added once we get to the end of it. This braita is going to take us to the next Mishnah, Ditanya. Ushar kol chayvei mitot shebetorah ein machminim alehem chutz mizo. Okay, so all other chayvei mitot in the Torah, we don't do this other than this one. Ketzad u'silo, what do? It's just like our Mishnah really, except that they're going to add this one little point. Madlikim lo et haner b'bayit hapnimi. Here's like a way to set up. It's not the only way you could do it, but make sure there's light in the inner room. Moshivim lo edim b'bayit hachitzon. We put witnesses in this outer house that's dark. Kadesha Yehu Henel Imoto, you put on the light in the room where he's going to go into because you want the witnesses to see him. Vishominit Kolon, you want them to hear him. We know but you don't want him to see them. The halal me'olo. And then, again, the person who we tried to sway says to him, Emor Mashama Talibichu, tell me now, right? Just you and me, it's just the two of us. Tell me now what you told me before. Vihu Omer lo, and then he tells him, Vahala Omer, and then the original guy says, you know, the one who he was trying to trip him up, says, hey, how are we going to leave God and go worship idols? If he goes back, great, and says, you're right, we shouldn't do this. Again, the exact same language in the Mishnah. If he says this is what's good, okay, the witnesses who are outside, bring him to court and stone him. Now, my Gemara ends here. Okay, this might sound familiar. We had the same thing. I don't know what you're looking. If you're looking at Safari, you'll see the Gemara doesn't end here. Okay, but in my Gemara, it ends here. And I actually have a footnote that takes me to the side. which tells me that, oh, we're missing a part. And in fact, I brought it here to share my screen. I'm going to put it, it's also in the study guide for today. The only thing in the study guide is just that, but here's the study guide. Here you have the extra section that was taken out. And this might explain why the bright is here, because without this section, it doesn't really add anything. But now they tell you, v'chein asu leben sitada belod. And in fact, this was done to the son of Sitada in Lod. Okay, this happened. I think they wanted to tell us, actually, there was a case and this happened. V'talu be'erev Pesach, and they hung him on Erev Pesach. Okay, this is sounding a little Jesus-like, right? The whole Erev Pesach thing. It's also a section taken out. Well, let's see if this is talking about Jesus or not. Ben Sitada, the Gemara says, Ben Pendirahu. He wasn't the son of Sitada, he was the son of Pendira. Amar Rav Chisda, Baal Sitada Boel Pandira. Well, the mother slept with someone else. In other words, her husband was Sitada, and that's why they called him Ben Sitada, but really his father was Pandira, because the mother had relations with this other man whose name was Pandira. To which they say, Baal, the husband was Sitada, Papas Ben Yehuda. Clearly, they all know who we're talking about. And they said, what do you mean? That guy's name was Papas Ben Yehuda. He was obviously very famous. Ela imo Sitada. So they say, his mother was Sitada, and that's why they called him Ben Sitada. So the father was Pendira, the husband was Papas Ben Yehuda, and the mother was Sitada. So the Gemara says, imo was Sitada, Miriam Magdala Nishaya Havya. She was Miriam Magdala Nishaya. What is Magdala Nishaya? Some people think it's from Migdal. She was from the city Migdal, which in English, that's Mary Magdalene, who appears in the Gospels. And she is a woman who is not the mother of Jesus, not Mary, the mother of Jesus, but Mary Magdalene is one of the disciples, and she's actually present when Jesus is killed. What's this Nishaya women? So some people say Megada Nishaya means she would, Legadel means to braid, actually. So she would braid women's hair. Okay, and that's maybe another reason why this is what she's called. Okay, we don't know exactly if this is the same Miriam Magdalene. We don't really know. Either which way, it doesn't seem like it's Jesus' mother, although his mother was Mary. Maybe something was changed here. It's very unclear. So now they say, okay, so again, how could the mother be Sitada if the mother was Miriam Magdala and Nashaya? To which they answer, satit da mi ba'ala. Remember Sota, Masechet Sota? The Samach Tet is satita. She left. Da is, this. Like this woman left her husband, and that's why she was called Sitada. Okay, so basically, first of all, we're showing this meisit came from bad lineage. He was a mamzer. His mother was married to someone else, had relations with a different man. Her name was even reflective of how terrible she was. And he ends up getting hung on Erev Pesach because of what he did. Okay, now, is this Jesus? Is it not Jesus? So there's a lot of reasons to think it's not. First of all, it happened in Lod. This was in Jerusalem. And Miriam Magdalene is not his mother. And there's all sorts of issues that don't really seem to jive with the fact that this is Jesus. If it's not Jesus, then why was it taken out for the censor? So it happens in the disputes, in the big disputes between the Christians and the Jews in the 1200s. So this came up as a text, and they said, look, they thought this was definitely talking about Jesus, even though maybe it wasn't. The Quran even says that there was an Egyptian sorcerer named Sitada, and they think that this is who it was. It had nothing to do with Jesus, but they thought it did because it sounded similar. And they got upset with the Jews. Look at this. And then Rabbi Shimon of Paris says, this is not Jesus. Okay, this is someone else. You can see it's Lod. It's not the right timing. All of it is off. But anyway, it clearly was taken out and not necessarily put back in. Okay, again, Safari put it back in, and the Koran, Safari is based on the Koran. But in the regular Gemara, you won't see it. In the Schottenstein, I didn't even see a footnote about it. Anyway, it's, as usual, a very interesting thing, the whole censorship of the Talmud. And it does seem like it's unlikely this is really talking about Jesus, but somebody else. Okay, new Mishnah. Meidiach. Okay, so the Mishnah now says, meidiach is someone who says, let's go worship idols. We already discussed this. Now we move on to the mechashef in the Mishnah. A witch, okay, someone who engages in sorcery, a sorcerer. So, if you actually do an act of witchcraft, then you're chayav. But not like a magic trick, right? Where people fool you to believe it's just an illusion. Nothing really happened. Something has to happen for you to be obligated, liable, the death penalty. We'll see later that even achizat einayim is forbidden. You just don't get the death penalty for it. Now, what does it mean? You can't do magic tricks? So some of the commentaries try to draw a line between someone who actually it look like it's an optical illusion, but something actually was done, but it's more like an optical illusion rather than magic. But if you really don't do anything and it just looks like something, that's really not going to be forbidden at all. Hard to know exactly where to draw the line there, but interesting in general. They talk about this kind of stuff. Rabbi Akiva Omer Mishum Rabbi Yeshua, he wants to give an example. Shneim loktim kishuim. Two people gather kishuim, gourds. Echad loket patur, ve'echad loket chayav. One will be exempt and one will be liable. We're going to explain what it means lechozinayim and what it means to kishuf. If you actually make the zucchinis move on their own without doing anything to them, right? That's kishuf in your chayav. If you just make it look, but they don't actually move, they just look like they're all in the same place. Somehow you make some illusion, right? We've all been to those museums and stuff where they can make all sorts of things look, right? Or magic shows where they make things look real, but they're not really. So that would be exempt. So now the Gemara starts, and we have exactly what we're expecting to hear. And it's the only thing we're going to talk about the meidiach, because we already dealt with it in the previous Mishna, which is Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, meidiach iranidach shanukan. Okay, Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, this is the meidiach iranidach. Okay. Ha-mechashev zeh ha'oseh ma'aseh. Tanu Rabbanan. So now the Braita teaches like this. Mechashefa, echad ish ve'echad isha. Okay, so the Braita teaches a mechashefa, man and a woman, meaning even though mechashefa is in feminine form, it could also be a man who's a sorcerer. Im kemata maloma mechashefa, so why is it in the feminine form? Mipnei sherov nashim mitzuyot b'kshafim, because most women are found in witchcraft, okay, or sorcery. Okay, now, how do you read the sentence? It could read as most women are witches, okay, which is hard to read, or most witchcraft or sorcery is found among women. I think that's more the way this sentence is meant to be read. That if you look at percentage, especially in those days, how many people engaged in witchcraft, it was more women. Okay, you definitely see that in the Talmud. Most of the stories about witchcraft are women, although today we're going to see a bunch and some are going to be men. Mitatan bameh, what's their death penalty? So in our Mishna, we see it's skila, but we're going to see 4 different opinions here, really about which death penalty, only 2 opinions. But then we're going to have what's the source for saying stoning, or what's the source for either which one. And we're going to have 4 opinions about what the source is, okay? And whether it's stoning or something else. So the first one is actually something else. Rabbi Yossi Adlili Omer, Ne'ema ke'an mechashefa lo techayeh, uses the language of mechashefa will not survive, will not live. Techayev, and Emar lahalan lo techayeh kol neshama. And it says by the 7 nations, when we come and conquer the land, don't leave anyone alive. It's the exact same word, techayeh. And malahalam b'saif, hafkam b'saif, just like there in the battle of Sichon and Og in Bamidbar, they killed them by the sword, so therefore their punishment was by the sword, also here by the sword. Rabbi Akiva Omer, okay, he's the only one who says it's not stoning, it's by the sword. Right, decapitation that we learned. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Ne'emar kama chashefa lo techayev, and Ne'emar lahalan im behema im ish lo yechayev. We said that anyone who went up on Har Sinai, man or person, or woman or person, any human or animal, gets stoned. And that was where we learned, that you also have to push them off from the house. But basically, we learn here, there it says lo yechayeh, will not survive, and here it says lo techayeh. It's pretty similar, just a change of a taf and a yud, which is not a significant change. And therefore, malahalam b'skila, avkam b'skila. Just like there it's stoning, it says so in the pasuk, also here it's stoning. Amarla Rabbi Yossi, before we get to the other 2 opinions, Rabbi Yossi says, Ani danti lo techayemi lo techayeh, ata danta lo techayemi lo yechayeh. I have a better proof, because mine is the exact same word, techayeh, techayeh. You're using yechayeh and techayeh. It's not the same. Amarla Rabbi Akiva, Ani danti Yisrael mi Yisrael, sheribabim katu mitot harbei. I learned Jew from a Jew. Right? The case of Har Sinai was Jews. Here it's also Jews. And they have a lot of options of death penalties, and yet it's skila there, and therefore it must be skila here. There was only one death penalty for Gentiles, so of course they were going to get decapitated. But now we're talking about a Jew who engages in witchcraft. How do I know? I'm going to learn it from a Gentile who only has one death penalty anyway. We have lots of possibilities. So it doesn't make any sense to learn it from there, and therefore he disagrees. Starting now at the top of Amud Samach Zayin Amud Bet, Ben Azeh Omer. So again, we're going to have 2 more explanations. This time both of them are going to say stoning. The question is from where? So they agree with Rabbi Akiva that it's stoning. The question is, what's their source? Different source. Ben Azeh Omer, Ne'emar mechashefa lo techayeh. V'ne'emar kol shochevim behema amot yumat. Smacho inyan lo. Ma shochevim behema b'skila, af mechashef b'skila. Penata is Dorish, what we call smichut parshia. This section is next to that section. Mechashefa lo tichya appears right next to kol shochavim be'ema. Kol shochavim be'ema gets stoned. Also, then here the mechashefa gets stoned. Marla, Rabbi Yehuda does not like this reason. We have this the same with the Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Kiva. What, just because there's a vav, we're gonna the ubat kohen, we're gonna give the burning punishment to another person, right? Same thing here. Just because of two things are next to each other, we're gonna give the harsher punishment of stoning. Ella, he says, I have a different proof. Generally, it talked in the Torah about all sorts of kishuf, and Oven Yidoni were part of that. But then there's a separate pasuk about Oven Yidoni that says they get stoned. Lama Yatsu, why did they separate those two from everything else? They took them out of the general group of all of the others to say, these get stoned, and from there you're going to learn all the others get stoned. It's to build a paradigm. To which the Rabbi Yehuda, now they're going to say, wait a minute, we have a question, right? So again, what's the paradigm? Just like Oven Yidoni gets stoned, also the mechashef gets stoned. But wait, how do we do paradigms? We've learned this many times, called a binyan av. When you have one thing and it just says it in one place, we assume it builds a paradigm for everywhere else. Once it appears in two places, we say, oh, it means specifically they're not anywhere else. So if it says it by Oven Yidoni, now they're all in the same pasuk, but still it's two topics within the issue of sorcery, right? These are two different things, the Oven and the Yidoni. So remember, one is bringing up people from the dead, that's the Ov, and the Yidoni is someone who kind of says, if this happens, then I'll do that, something along those lines, some sort of witchcrafty kind of thing, determining what they're going to do. So basically, we're going to say it should just be for those two things, and we shouldn't learn to there anywhere else. So Amar Rabbi Zachariah, Ada Amra means this means, okay, it doesn't mean a person, Ada, it's just saying this comes to teach you. Kasava Rabbi Yehuda Shnei Ktuvim Habib Kecha Melamdim. Rabbi Yehuda must think that when there's two things, two exceptions to the rule, it still can teach about the whole rule. Only once there's three do we say it's only here and nowhere else. And now we're going to go into more about this whole kshafim in general. Okay, we've been talking about what is the death penalty for kshafim and where do we learn it from. We saw 4 different opinions. Now we're going to get to what is sorcery really. And it's a fascinating question. How does it interplay with God? The main place we see this in the Torah is the Egyptians. They tried in the 10 Mako, right? The first 2, they were able to produce dam, blood. They were able to produce the frogs. But when it came to kinim, they said etzba Elohimi, they couldn't do it. Now, what is this power that they have? And it's something that puzzled people for generations. And is it a real power? Can they override God? Can God override them? Like, how does this work with our belief of God? That's really what we're getting at now. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, lama nikashman kshafim? Why are they called kshafim? Shemakchishim pamalia shamala. They're going to do one of these things called notrikon, like an abbreviation, but it's saying kshafim. Kafshin is makchishim. Hey, mem is pamalia shamala. They can override what God says. Okay, these people really have power. They can do something against what God determines. Okay, which is very strong. Now we have something that seems to say the opposite, although we're going to have to reconcile these. Ein od milvado. Okay, here's a pasuk about God. It says that it's in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 4. Atar et aladat ki Hashem Elohim. You showed everyone that you're God. Ein od milvado. There's no one else like you. So, Amar Rabbi Chanina, afilu lidvar kshafim. There's no one else like you, meaning even witchcraft can't override God. So now we're going to have a story about this, and then we'll see how these two interplay. Some people think that this disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan, but you'll see the Sugya tries to put them together. Hayi itita, there was a woman. She tried to get dust from under the feet, or dust from under the feet of Rabbi Chanina. She wanted to do sorcery with it and basically do something against him. Amar le, he realized what she was doing. Amar la, sorry, he said to her, if you can succeed in getting the dirt from under my feet, go for it. Use it. Doesn't bother me. Ain't ov milvadoktiv. There's no one other than God, and God is protecting me. Ini, is that really true? V'hamar Rabbi Yochanan. What did Rabbi Yochanan just say? Lama nikashman mechashefim. Why do they call them mechashefim? Shemachishim pamal yishamala. They can't go against what God wants. So Shane Rabbi Chanina did nafish skute. Rabbi Chanina was different because he had special skuyot. Okay? And it seems like what they're trying to say is that if you have special skuyot, you're a special person, you're a tzaddik, as we might call you, then God will protect you. from kshafim. But if not, you're not protected from kshafim. Now you could say, right, this is real, this is true. There are kshafim in the world, and God might not protect you from them. Okay. Or you could say that maybe it's just a way of telling the people you should be a tzaddik because then you'll be protected. If you're nervous about the kshafim, this will put you in the right direction to do the right thing. Anyway, clearly it does seem like they believed in this magic stuff, and there was something to it, perhaps. And it could sometimes override God, what God wishes. Amar Rabbi Ivu bar Nagre, Amar Rabbi Chiur bar Abba, bilatehem elu maaseh shedim, bilahatehem elu maaseh kshafim. We're quoting now two different psukim from Sefer Shmot, the same chapter 7, talks about the Makot and the Egyptians. So in one pasuk it says they used latehem, and another pasuk it said they used lahatehem. What's the difference between them? So they say in the Gemara here that latehem, this is what Rabbi Ivu passes in the name of Rabbi Chiur bar Abba, latehem is using evil spirits. Lahatehem is sorcery. These are two different methods. V'cheinu omer, et halahat hacherev hamitapechet. This is in the entrance to Gan Eden in the beginning of Sefer Bereshit. It said there's a sword that's constantly turning around. Now that must be done with magic. That's not an evil spirit. That's just something magic. That magic is keeping this going. And it says lahat, which we said is magic. Amar Abaye, another way you can distinguish. Okay, besides they're each called something else. He says de kapid amana shed, de lo kapid amana kshafim. If the person is very particular about which implement they use, and they have to use a particular implement, it makes me think of like a magic wand, and it's only this magic wand that can do my magic, that's an evil spirit. And if it doesn't matter, they could do it with any kind of utensil, that is magic. Amar Abai, Hilchot kshafim kilchot Shabbat. Abai also says the halachas of kshafim are like Shabbat. Okay, in what way are they like Shabbat? Well, you might remember this. If you remember one thing from Shabbat, this is one of the things you probably remember, because it kind of was everywhere in the Masechet. Yesh mehem beskilas, some get stoned. Yesh mehem patur aval asur. It's a very big phrase in Masechet Shabbat where it says patur, but patur means you're exempt, but it's forbidden to do. Okay, you still can't do it. Usually it means it's forbidden by rabbinic law. V'yesh mehem mutar l'chatchila. And then there's things that are completely permitted, like in Masechet Shabbat, same thing with kshafim. What's what? How sema say if you actually do an action using witchcraft, biskila. Okay, you get stoned. If you do something with witchcraft, but it just is an illusion, patur aval asur. So you can't do it, but it's not, you don't get punished. Mutar lechatchila. So what's permitted entirely? Well, Rav Chanina v'Rav Oshaya. Okay, we're going to tell a story about them. Kol ma'alei Shabbat, every Erev Shabbat, havu aske behilchot yitzira. They would sit and learn the halachot of the creation of the world. Umivrele iglatilta, a special calf. There's always a thing about a third something calf. Okay, there's different interpretations of what this is, but it's like a special calf would be created for them, would just appear. Now, they didn't really do it on purpose. It's like God kind of brought it as a reward. Sometimes people explain it like that. And then they would eat it. It was real, and they were able to benefit from. Amar Rav Ashi Chazina le'lavua de Karna. Okay, Rav Ashi is telling us other witchcraft that he saw. The father of Karna. Karna was an Amora with Shmuel, if you remember. Father of Karna apparently wasn't. This isn't considered a good thing. He would blow from his nose and a big, right, this you always see magic tricks where they pull out a whole long scarf from their mouth or something, or from their ears, and he made it look like there was this big scarf, like a mesh, like a silk scarf or so coming out of his nose. Okay, that was something he used to do. Now we're going to go to the Khartoumim. Paro said, right, when it got to Kinim, they couldn't do it. Why couldn't they do Kinim? From here you learn, by the way, it should be probably Rabbi Elazar. I think it's not Rabbi Eliezer, it must be the Emora, Rabbi Elazar. Yeah, it says to change it in my note. From here you learn that that an evil spirit can't create something smaller than a seorah, than the size of a bean. And that's why they couldn't do Kinim. It was too small to create. Frogs they could do, but not Kinim. Rav Papa Amar Elohim. Rav Papa says, what are you talking about, Rabbi Elazar? No way, no how. Afilu kigam lanami lo matzibari. They can't even create camels. It's not like they could create things. They're not God. Hi michnafle, hi lo michnafle. What could they do with camels? With camels, or with frogs, let's say, they could gather them together. They could find frogs that are in existence and gather them in one place. But they can't do that with kinim. They're too small. Okay, the lice are too small. They can't do it with that. That's where their power is limited, not in creation. They can't create at all. Amalei, again, how much are they like God or not like God? Amalei Rav le Rabbi Chia. Rav said to Rabbi Chia, he's now telling him a story of something he saw. I saw an Arab merchant. He took a knife and he sliced a camel in half or into pieces. And then he drummed on a drum and it went back all together and it was alive. Okay, crazy thing. Rav tells Rabbi Chia, this is what I saw. Rabbi Chia is a little bit skeptical and he says to him, after he put it all back together and stuff, or even before, did you see blood and stuff, guts on the floor from when he cut it up? Ella, right? Clearly you didn't. It was just clearly he made you believe that he was cutting it up, but he didn't really cut it up. It was just an illusion. Alexandria, right? So Rabbi Chia is obviously a little bit skeptical about this whole magic thing. So Ze'eri came to Egypt and he went to buy a camel. Zabin Chamra, he bought a donkey. Kimatala shkuya maya, pashal v'kam gamla diskunita. Well, he went to feed the camel water, the donkey water, and when the donkey drank water, it turned into a piece of wood. And that's all it was. It was a piece of wood that someone had put a spell on and turned into a donkey. And the spell, Pashar means the spell broke. The spell broke when the donkey drank water, and it turned into a piece of wood. So what does he do? He goes back to the merchants. Amrule, they said to him, Ilav Ze'iriat, if you weren't Ze'irian, a very well-known person, we wouldn't give you back this donkey. Why? It's your fault. Why is it your fault? Nobody buys anything from us and doesn't check it by having it drink water first to see if the spell comes off. Okay? Everybody knows that, and you should have known that buying it, that there was a good chance that this was a donkey that was under a spell, and you should have had it drink water and checked it. You didn't check, it's your fault. But because you're Ze'eri, we'll return it. We'll take it back. Yanai. Now we're going to learn about this Yanai character. He is also a sorcerer, and he goes to a place where someone else is engaged in sorcery, and he figures it out right away. Yanai ikla hu shpiza. He goes to an inn. Amar hu eshke amai. He asked him to give him some water. Krivu shatita. They gave him water that was mixed with some flour in it. Chazit kemarachshin sifate. So he sees the person who's bringing it to this woman that she's mumbling something, and he realizes she's putting it on an incantation. Shade portamine, so he goes into, more secluded place. He pours a little on the floor, and what happens? Have akrabe, turns into scorpions. So he realizes that she was trying to put a spell on him. Amar Louis goes back to the people who gave it to him. He says, Ana shatamiditchu atunamishtu mididi. Okay, I drank from you, now you drink from me. So ashkeam havai chamra. So now, ashkie. So he gives this woman who put the spell on him some to drink. Havai chamra, she turns into a donkey. What does he do? Rechava, he rides on her. Salik l'shuka, he takes her out to the shuk, to the marketplace. Ata chaverta, her friend comes, saw what had happened. Psharala, she undoes the spell. And chazia dirachiv, the kai aitita b'shuka, and everybody sees this guy, Yanai, riding in the shuk on aitita, on a woman in the shuk. And basically he ends up being humiliated because he's standing there riding on a woman in the shuk. Funny story kind of thing. Okay, why they're bringing this, I don't know, but they want to just show, I guess, how prevalent witchcraft was and these spells that people were putting on each other in their day. Okay, we're going to end with the Makkah of Tzfardea. This is a very famous midrash because it's a big problem in the Pasuk. Vatal Tzfardea v'tchasid Eretz Mitzrayim. So it says that Tzfardea came up and covered all of Egypt. Now, once Tzfardea covered all of Egypt, something doesn't make sense in the Strasha. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Tzfardea chataita, ishchitza umarat kol Eretz Mitzrayim. So there was one fraud, and then it multiplied and filled all of Egypt. Kitanat, but this is actually a machloka tanaim. Rabbi Akiva omer tzfardea achataita umalat kol eretz Mitzrayim. Akiva says it was really one tzfardea, and that one tzfardea was gigantic. It was one gargantuan tzfardea that covered the whole city of Egypt, or the whole country. Marlo Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. Lazar ben Azariah says to him, Akiva, malacha etzel haggadah. It's a great line. What are you doing learning Haggadah? Stick to halacha. You know your halacha really well. You're an expert in that area. You don't know anything about Haggadah. I'll handle the Haggadah. You handle that. Well, what kind of a parshanut is that? Of course, it wasn't once for day that filled all of Egypt. So he explains, right? But Rabbi Elazar explains, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Tzfardeh achateta, sharkamahem behim bau. Okay, instead of a shritza, like we said before, that multiplied, it was that there was one tzfardeh, and then the tzfardeh whistled, called to all the other tzfardim, did like a frog call, and all the other tzfardim came, and that's how they filled up the whole land of Egypt. With that, we finished our daf with that interesting image. Okay, so we started with the meisit. We had a few inferences from the Mishna, which ended up to be not the case. It seemed to exclude other cases, and then we said, no, maybe it's really only excluding them for Rahmana, or maybe it's not even excluding them at all. Just saying this case is one, and then the next case is in the next Mishnah, and maybe that's it. And then we got to that whole section they took out because of Jesus, okay, which again didn't really seem to be Jesus, but maybe could be Jesus. Maybe they changed some of the details so it didn't look like Jesus, but maybe not. Maybe it really wasn't at all, right? Likely it really wasn't. It just sounds like it, and that's why it got taken out for the censorship, by the censor. Anyway, then we had the meidiach, and then we really jumped right away into kishuf, and we talked about number one, what's the source for what the punishment for kishuf is, and then why is it called kshafim? What's the power of kshafim? How does it interplay with God? And lots of interesting stories. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.